to everyone?
Yes,
All right,
absolutely.
okay, great. So, today we are going to speak about an issue that affects not just institutions but people, lives, and futures, and an issue that shapes how safe we feel in the spaces where we study, work, and grow. And our discussion revolves around workplace dignity and how we can collectively strengthen gender sensitization and the POSH framework, which I'll elaborate eventually in my lecture. And moving from culture of silence to a culture of awareness and accountability. And the topic of today's session being workplace dignity and gender sensitization. So, this is not just a legal topic, it is a human topic because, at its core, sexual harassment, gender based violence, it is not merely a violation of rules, it is a violation of rights, dignity, and safety. And to understand how we reached this point, we must look at the history behind how this law came to be in shape. For decades, India had really no dedicated legislation to be addressing sexual harassment in workplaces. Women who faced harassment in workplaces, whether inappropriate comments, unwanted physical contact, or misuse of authority, we had really little legal recourse. And it only pertained to two sections which were provided in our criminal laws, which is Indian Penal Code, or at this time we call it Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which were section 354, section 509, which covered outraging modesty and insulting modesty. But these provisions were limited, so they did not really recognize the psychological harm, the hostile environment, the power imbalance, or workplace dynamics. So, how did we come to where we are today? It all begins with one lady. Her name was Bhavri Devi. She was a grassroots worker who tried to stop a child marriage in a village, and she was brutally gang raped as retaliation. So, this was not just a crime, it was a reflection of how societal structures punish women for asserting agency. Now, this matter reached the Supreme Court, and the case title was Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, and this is back in 1997. And the Supreme Court then made a groundbreaking observation, and it held that sexual harassment at the workplace, it violates the fundamental rights of equality, of dignity, and the right to practice any profession in a safe environment. So, because Parliament had not yet enacted the law, so the court stepped in and created the Vishakha guidelines, the much celebrated Vishakha guidelines that we then formulated with the gift that the Supreme Court gave to this country. So, the guidelines formally defined sexual harassment for the first time in India. It recognized that harassment may be verbal, non verbal, or behavioral. It mandated that workplaces must prevent, prohibit, and redress harassment, and the formation of the complaints committee. Or I was informed by Professor Sana that just like any other organization that is now supposed to be having the ICC under the POSH laws, this university also does. So it is all flowing from the Vishakha guidelines that was set by the Supreme Court in the celebrated and landmark case of Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. So, wherein the formation of complaints committee with external members were also mandated. And then it also emphasized that silence is often a result of fear and lack of support. So, this was a defining moment for this country. And it acknowledged the experiences of countless women and laid the foundation for what would become the POSH Act of 2013. And it has come into effect on 9th of December 2013. Uh, this is a very small act with 10 sections, but I'm not going to get into the depths of it because that is for another day. But just to touch upon it, uh, it talks about the prevention that institutions must proactively create awareness, which what we are doing today, right now. The institution must proactively create awareness, it must conduct training, and it must establish clear behavioral norms and then prohibition. So the act clearly defines unacceptable behavior. And there is a very nuanced and fine line between what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. So it has cleared all the ambiguities or subjective interpretation. So to some, one gesture may mean a lot, and to some it may be something which is dismissive for them. So this act has laid down uh, the behavioral aspect also, and then it also has laid down the redressal mechanisms, like how institutions are required to set up what I just said is internal complaints committee that would follow the due process and resolve cases within the strict timelines. Now, strict timelines is extremely important, and why I'm saying this is because, which I will also come to the later part of my discussion, wherein I will give the real life example of the cases arising out of the violations of the POSH Act. So, this act places responsibility not only on individuals but on institutions themselves. So, an unsafe environment is not merely a personal issue, but it is an institutional failure. So, this is just the basic foundation and the basic introduction to why we are doing what we are doing right now. So, because we are currently talking about I mean, of course, it's workplaces, but shifting focus from workplaces in general to academic environment, our colleges and universities. So, the University Grant Commission has laid down, I mean, over a period of all these many years, there were several committees that were formed, and it then ultimately came about to form a robust committee on women's safety and security. And then they made a critical observation that we need to challenge the culture of silence. Many students, especially young women, they remain silent because they fear backlash, judgment, loss of opportunities, or perhaps disbelief that if I say something about person where there's a power dynamics, let's say about a teacher or a senior, then I may not be believed that this has really happened with me. So that was the core reason to formulate a regulation under the UGC in order to break this culture of silence. So why was this done? Because if the safe campus, right, is not created by the actions of a few, it is created by collective responsibility. I will just speak about the few recommendations or something, because we've all culminated today wherein we have our principals to the teachers to the students, I believe. So the recommendations also something that should be concerning all of us is that we all, like I said, must have a legally compliant internal complaints committee. And the ICC is not just symbolic, it is the core. It is to ensure that there are fair inquiries, providing support and setting institutional standards. And ICC details must be publicly displayed. I've just, because I was looking up about this lovely university, so I just happened to have opened the website. So I did see that although there is a session for a section for grievance in your college's website, but nothing specifically about POSH Act, or nothing specifically about lodging complaint with respect to such conducts. So I mean, I'm sure that there are portals of the students where they can lodge their complaints. So I believe that to be covered in that grievance redressal, so that people feel safer to open their to open up. So it, but then this is a recommendation, it must be strictly formulated that there should be public display of the details, where students must know who to approach, where to go, and how complaints are addressed. Many a times we have all these laws, but we don't know what to do with these laws, because how to really, if something happens to me as a student, 10 years in the past, of course the Posh Act was not such a big this posh it was not much talked about then, but it did of course exist even then. But the more we spread awareness, the more people know that okay, this is how I should go and get my grievances addressed. Then it creates a safe work space, work environment for everyone around us. And then the Act and ICC information, like I said, it must be available online and offline. And there must be zero tolerance. The zero tolerance must be a real policy and not just a statement. Regular sensitization events must be conducted, like what we are doing right now. I mean, counter, like, there are so many stigmas and secondary victimization attached to such complaints raised by the victims. The victims rather face more judgment than the accused in this time and age, where if at all they have to raise their voice, they so many matters I deal with where the very step to file the complaint is, especially with women, they are so stigmatized, and they feel the pressure that they never ever dare to raise their voices. So institutions, it's our responsibility, it's our collective responsibility as institutions to actively dismantle this mindset through training and policy clarity, like what it is and how it is going to help you, and what is the recourse, where from point A to point Z, how your complaint is going to take the trajectory that it's going to take. So that kind of talk is really, really important in order to spread awareness. Uh, and then, of course, we must invite counselors for awareness sessions, and then legal experts. Health awareness programs is also important in order to and this is not just me saying it, these are actually the guidelines that all the higher education institutions are under the UGC, they are governed under. So this is basically the UGC regulations 2015, where the sexual harassment. And now that I've been talking about sexual harassment, I must also define what it is for everybody's understanding. So, sexual harassment, it includes any unwelcome is the key word, because consent is everything, right? Physical contact, of course, that's one. Explicit or implicit sexual advances, verbal remarks with sexual undertones, non-verbal gestures such as suggestive body language, some kind of gesture, some kind of action. And when you know it, it's the gut feeling that tells you that this is something which is not acceptable, and it's something which is falling under that sexual undertone line. Of course, direct demand for sexual favors, and we've had several cases where we have had people in our workplaces, in our community, where we've been asked for some kind of sexual favors in exchange of the power dynamics that they enjoy. It also includes, because we're talking about the university and the workplace as far as higher education institutions are concerned. So it could be, for example, let's say promises of academic or professional benefit in exchange for some kind of compliance. And it's not just that you're promising something, it's also that if you're threatening for negative consequences for refusal, so that is also something which falls under sexual harassment definition. And most importantly, creating an environment for a woman that feels hostile, degrading, embarrassing, or unsafe. So there it is. And as far as the institutions are concerned, like how our university has an ICC, the committee, the minimum members that ought to be at least 6 members should be formulated with 50% women, and one external expert which has to be a woman. This is the formation of the internal complaints committee that I'm talking about, that it should comprise of at least 6 members with one external expert, and the total ratio should have 50% should qualify with 50% women, right? So this is how the formation of the committee is ensured. And you have to clearly explain the process of the complaint, so especially the students and the faculty members, they know how to reach out without fear. And all the ICC members, most importantly, we just what I've seen is that we just appoint members just for the compliance sake, but they don't have proper training in handling sensitive situations, or maybe maintaining neutrality or understanding the trauma of the victim. Because as human beings, all the lawyers, the judges, we're all human beings at the end of the day. So there is a bias anytime you come across any complaint, like any news on the newspaper, something happened with someone, some complaint, hamare andar, there is always that inherent bias somehow we form, that must be wrong with the guy, must be wrong with the girl. So it's supremely important as members of a committee which is to decide the fate of a complaint, which can have a life altering ramifications of that particular student or faculty member or an employee. You have to be neutral, you have to really understand the place that they're coming from, and you have to have the right training in order to understand the how to handle the sensitive situation. Because it really gets I have been an external member of the ICC committee, and it really sometimes is just absolutely, like overwhelming. So that's why the training is supremely important. And just to talk about the process of how the complaint, when to be filed, and the inquiry, how it should be taken. So complaints, like in the beginning I said, timeline is really important. So the complaint should be filed within 3 months of the incident taking place, or if it has happened in series. So from the last incident, there should be, the timeline should be within 3 months you have to get the complaint filed. So that is one thing that is extremely important. So that's why, see, if you conduct something like this, and maybe, in such sessions I have found that while I'm talking, someone is able to relate to it, and if, because they don't know that there is a timeline attached to it, and then they come up to me and they like, I want to take a step ahead, and then they realize that okay, they're really lost on time, but a damage done is a damage done, no time can fix it. But because of these technicalities, and obviously it's something that has to be done within the laws, within the four corners of law, so sometimes people lose out because they have not really acted on time. So that's one. When should the complaint be filed? And then secondly, the completion of the inquiry by the ICC must be completed within 90 days, right? And then confidentiality must be maintained strictly. And how they really, the penalties for, if these compliances are not made by the institution, then as far as universities are concerned, if a complaint is filed and then you find out that these ICC committee is not in place, or the compliances are not being followed with, there are consequences. The universities can be withdrawn, there can be withdrawal of grants, there can be derecognition of the institution, negative impact on accreditation. But we don't have to worry about that because this university is POSH compliant. So there's that. And as far as what considers, I would actually like to demonstrate with scenarios, with examples of uh, like a realist. Let's break down a realistic scenario that many university students can relate to, particularly, like let's say Aisha, she's a final year undergraduate student, and she's working under a Professor Rao, who is a project guide. And initially very encouraging and very her late night messages. He's complimenting her potential and confidence, and emojis that carry a personal or emotional tone. So these are personal terrain. He's insisting that she should, come alone, come to my cabin after this period. Others will distract you, you work better when it's just us. So these kinds of thing. And you, during the review session, if he's sitting closely, if he's touching the arm unnecessarily, the Aisha is feeling extremely uncomfortable, but she's silent because he's the one who controls her grades. He is the one who evaluates her. He's the one who's going to give her marks and potentially her future opportunities. So then someone is observing and she's discomforted, the body language and hesitation. So if Aisha knows that there is an internal complaints committee and this is the concerned member, I have to go to this professor, and here I will be taken care of without any bias, without any kind of judge. Of course, we know that the misconduct is falling under the definition of sexual misconduct, and there is an unwelcome physical contact, there is a sexual or romantic overtures, there are repeated personal messages. So then of course then the ICC will know how to take care of it and handle it. And of it, there are proper sessions that goes on, there are witnesses, there are evidences, there are a lot of procedure, there's a proper investigation that goes on into coming into an outcome, final outcome. So this is a demonstration of what is a misconduct. But I'll also tell you what is not misconduct, because again, like I said, that there's a gray line. For some it something may be misconduct, something they will not even realize. So, but clearly in black and white, what is not misconduct? If you are providing constructive academy, if you're calling students in office hours for academic reviews and sending academic announcements. So, and when something happens within these lines, and then when certain complaints are made, this is not harassment, right? If so, this is something which is very obvious. It's very clear. So, a simple diagnostic test can be: is this behavior consistent for all students? Is it that Professor Rao is just calling me or calling everybody else? Or some may be over friendly. Some faculty members are are really like friends. So so you have to see that, is this behavior consistent for all students? Is there pressure or is there favoritism? Again, had his present with the members, with their colleagues, with their classmates, or would it and does behavior is the behavior making me feel uncomfortable? So one has to do the self test, and if you know that what is your answer is misconduct. Uh, uh, so like I was telling you about the limitation grounds, I would just like to summarize. I mean, towards the end we are. So recently, in fact, I had the opportunity to be present in the courtroom where something very recent took place. We know that in Calcutta there is a very renowned law school called NUJS, National University of Juridical Sciences. So there was a complaint by a faculty member against the vice chancellor of that. Ultimately, widely reported, even though the complaint to be valid, but since it did not meet the timeline, it did not meet the limitation ground, which was 3 months. That complaint was much belated. She filed it, but she filed it beyond 3 months. So in the committee, the outcome was that even though she's filed it beyond 3 months, but it will still be acknowledged, and we will further proceed with the investigation. So the VC challenged it to High Court, Calcutta High Court. Calcutta High Court overturned it ultimately. Then she went to the Supreme Court challenging that if my complaint has been acknowledged, so merely on technical ground that it's beyond 3 months, it should not be dismissed. But Supreme Court still did not interfere, and Supreme said that no, it cannot be done because you have crossed that limitation period. But the court did something unprecedented. In its ruling, the court said that even though her complaint is not going to move ahead with further investigation, but the allegations of harassment, it will be permanently attached to that vice chancellor's CV, in his service record, in his CV, in his biodata. So the court took a very strange turn in this, and it ensured that the allegation should haunt the wrongdoer. So that was the example that the court wanted to set, that even though we are not allowing your case, but it should haunt the wrongdoer forever as well. So it gave a very resounding lesson to someone who is as big as a vice chancellor of a very big national law school of Calcutta, of our country, which is NUJS Kolkata. So this reinforces the moral seriousness with which sexual harassment must be approached. And according to the recent UGC data, between the period of 2015 to 2016, the cases of sexual harassment complaint, it rose from 121 in 2015-16 to 378 in 2022-2023. So the reporting has increased. And why? It's because of awareness and institutional mechanisms like yours, awareness sessions like this. So many universities have started organizing sensitization workshops, and but see, the challenges still remain, because again there is fear of retaliation. Sometimes if on LinkedIn we find many such coaching centers. If someone is complaining, then they may file, and they are posting about it also. So then they may file a case against that one person. Of course, it's a giant institution. So they may file a case of defamation. So there is a fear of retaliation always, and there's victim blaming. Then there is lack of institutional support and pure silence. That if something is happening to one, the rest are just like bystanders. They're not. There's a lot of silence in the circle. So that should not be the case. You should be encouraging of your colleagues or your classmates or your batchmates. So these barriers must be addressed, and basically, just that it's a call to action, that we must create a safe space, safe campus. And it's not just the job of one committee. Like I can see that this is being like organized by the gender sensitization committee, or one or two companies have come about. So it's a collective responsibility, and students, teachers, and staff, we must all challenge the stereotypes that fuel discrimination, and all the inappropriate jokes, comments, sexist remarks, behaviors. Supporting victims without judgment also must really come in turn to us. And we should refuse to participate in character assassination, and step in as active bystanders when we see that some boundaries are being crossed. And we must help build a culture where respect is the norm. So posh compliant institution is not only legally correct, it is emotionally mature, socially conscious, and it's deeply humane to be an ecosystem where dignity is not a favor we are extending, it's a responsibility that we are upholding for everyone. So this is my two bits on this topic, and I leave it to the attendants. So if there are any questions, I can take for 5 minutes, and then I would respectfully take your leave.
Is there any question from the participants on the topic? Thank you, ma'am, for the enriching session.
I will drop in my email ID in case, or I will share it with you, ma'am, in case anybody has any queries. I'll be very happy to take them up. Or if at all you want to do some detailed discussion on POSH Act particularly, because this was a very, like a very cursory overview. So I'll be very happy to be back again, and with whatever aid you need.
Okay, ma'am. Surely. And is there any question from the participants on the topic? Or I will move ahead with the formal vote of thanks. Is there any question?
I think you can move ahead with the vote of thanks. Yes, yes.
Okay, so it was an enlightening session from your end, and we have got to know different important aspects on the topic, like the definition and the instances of sexual misconduct, the composition of the ICC, the process and the other nitty-gritty of the ICC, and other various aspects on today's theme, which we got to know from you, ma'am. So it was really enriching. And yes, thank you again. And I also thank our respected principal, our coordinators and conveners of the organizing committees, and the faculty members, and also our students for joining the session. And we again hope to see you again for other sessions, which could be again a detailed one, which we may organize in the near future.
Certainly, certainly. Delighted to be in everyone's company. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So thank you everyone for joining. So kindly fill in the feedback form. Then we may take our leave.
So may I end the call? Rajashri?